Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fridays with Steve. It's good to be back with you again today. Looking forward to continuing our month of Microsoft licensing and us being a CSP and you being a software as a service licensing customer. I think it's an important topic. I swore to myself upon leaving Microsoft over a decade ago that I'd never talk about licensing again. But as it turns out, it's an important piece of the solution, right? Especially with all the things that have changed over time. The ability to, pay upon consumption, right? Whether it's Azure, AWS, or any of the other sort of cloud infrastructure platforms that are out there really pioneering that approach. And honestly, the CSP space, the modern workspace, is kind of similar if you think about it, right? You're really paying for the seats and the things people need to have access to be able to do their jobs, right? So, as it turns out, I've taken the knowledge developed over a career and continue to use it, and hopefully you can find it useful as well. What we're going to do today is just talk about some of the do's and don'ts, some of the stories I can bring to you to sort of illustrate what those do's and don'ts look like, some of the ways that Apex participates with our customers in the decision making process, in the adoption process, in the retiring other stuff process, and so I'm just gonna kind of run through a list. There aren't a lot of slides. I contemplated making my face bigger for this, but in order for me to be marginally respectable by November, I got to start a beard now. So if you're watching this live, it's in September. It's a slow growing affair, and so we're sort of in that awkward is Steve a hobo stage. And so because of that, maybe I'll leave my 4K camera picture a little bit smaller than I should, just to make sure that you're not forced to count stubble. And so no slides here. Obviously, you can always reach out to me for my list, or if you want to hear thoughts afterwards at sthompson@apexdigital.com. What I did is I captured a list, and I've got quite a contraption here in my home studio. I've got the list up in front of me, just right below the camera. So hopefully I can spend most of the time looking at it versus looking down at a piece of paper I had crafted with my notes. And I just want to run through some of these. They'll kind of bleed into each other and kind of overlap at times and play upon each other. The net result of this list of do's and don'ts is really to try and help you navigate the process, right? There are partners and organizations, I think still today, certainly back in the day, that used to offer a full-on service about how to negotiate your EA, right? All the tips and tricks for price concessions or getting some services added and things like that. I guess this is a little bit like that, in the sense that I want to help you, whether you're working with us or not, whether you're working with a different partner or not, give you some ideas about ways to maximize your licensing, avoid some pitfalls, and make sure you have the best experience possible. So the first do is probably maybe a little bit controversial internally, but it's, shop around and consider value. I'm very confident in our ability to deliver value at Apex, so I don't mind talking about this. One of the things that we see sometimes in customers we're pursuing is just a certain amount of inertia, right? Hey, this is how we buy. This is how we do it. It's simple. A lot of places, ourselves included, perhaps at times, we'll use tools like auto renew, or hey, you've got to cancel 60 days in advance. First off, be aware of those caveats in any of the contracts you sign, but shop around. And when I say consider value, what I mean is, oftentimes we'll talk to a customer, and the start of the conversation is all about price. What's the delta from MSRP or the next guy? And I'm a big Warren Buffett fan, and he always says that price is what you pay, value is what you get, right? The price itself isn't the sum total of the value from the licensing. And it isn't exclusive of things like support or expertise. One of the things that Apex typically does when we work with customers and looking to onboard their licensing or pursue them as a customer is we'll actually dig into their licensing, and we don't usually ever sell somebody the same program, the same levels, the same seat counts that they're currently on. Honestly, it's usually less, right? It's, hey, you're oversubscribed here, you're over licensed here. And the output of coming to a partner like us with expertise is a net savings. Even at the same price per seat, it's a net savings because of the advantages and the expertise that we bring to the table to really help you assess your position. And so when I say shop around, I do mean it, but I also encourage a kind of a holistic view of value, right? That value can be a ton of different things, and I'm a big believer that in a good negotiation, both parties win, right? I can cut you a deal on list price, especially if you sign up for my managed services, or let's take the savings here and apply it here. I'll save you some money on licensing up front. We'll agree to do some professional services down the road. Win-win for both parties, and I think that's something that's very much possible. So the corollary don't here is don't buy multiple ways, or don't have multiple people sort of operating independently doing your licensing work, whether it's purchasing or assignment. Have a process in place to sort of rationalize all of those things. Oftentimes, again, we deal with customers who find themselves in a situation, multiple contracts, multiple termination dates, oversubscribed here, undersubscribed there. And it's reflective of a lack of coordination internally, just because things kind of, matured over time. And so transparently, we have a customer in this situation right now, where I'd love to win the licensing, but as it turns out, I can't deliver all the licensing they need. So if they go with us for a portion of it, they are signing themselves up for multiple contracts with multiple vendors. And I was super transparent. I said, that's a don't, right? I think there are some do's, right? I think we can offer great support in this space. I think it is useful that it's tied to professional services work that we're going to be doing. I think there are some pros on the pro and con list, but and you can talk to any of my peers and check my work, but we were super transparent with them. We're saying, yeah, but you're also signing up for multiple contracts. You're signing up for more than one check per month when it comes to paying off your licensing in a similar sphere. The easiest example, just the generalized example, is really about on-prem licensing, right? When folks still are in that mode, a little bit or a lot, that can cause challenges with contracting and really getting multiple things in place, or having some limitations on what partners can do to help. That said, we do have a couple of customers who have made that choice. They've taken all those things into consideration and said, hey, Apex, we want to work with you over here, and we'll work with some unnamed partner from the suburbs of Chicago over here, right? And it makes sense for them. But they made a very conscious decision around it. And so the don't is just don't blindly go into that, but think about it very, very carefully. Great story from my past. My second go around at HP was in sort of the mid 2010s. And I still to this day, I remember Meg Whitman getting on stage, kind of an all employee talk, and explaining how there was $1 million a month. At this point, HP had a public cloud. I'm sure none of you remember it, but we had a public cloud, and we had infrastructure as a service and things like that available to customers. If you added up all of the Amex cards and the payments going to Amazon at that point, it was over $1 million a month. She was less than thrilled about that. But it sort of reflected the time, right? Departments, organizations were running fast, signing up AWS accounts and spinning all those up. And so that's just a kind of a good example of that lack of control, all that shadow IT kind of thing that we talk about a lot, where you end up with a lot of spend dispersed. So don't let that happen. Have a plan. Make conscious decisions about, how many contracts, who's going to administer it, who you're going to work with. Do consider under licensing versus over licensing versus management complexity. There's no perfect algorithm for this, but I think it's important that as a customer, you think about the cost of exactly matching, hello, ESPN, of exactly matching your users' needs. If you're 400 seats and you maybe could get away with 5 E3s versus E5s, let's say, what is the management cost to maintain 2 different license types, to understand the different capabilities, all of those kinds of things, lack of functionality, maybe someday they need all those kinds of things, versus, you know what, I'm just going to buy 400 E5s. There isn't a perfect solution to this, right? But you need to think about sort of a cost benefit analysis across that whole spectrum, not just license cost, right? If you're less than 300 seats, you have access to, the business line of licensing. Oftentimes, we start with, business premium. It's really the hero SKU in that space, and look for the exceptions. Well, if the exceptions are minimal, what added complexity are you bringing in with a second license type? There is some cost to that. I was talking to my boss this morning, and we talked about sort of this whole approach of, when do we do automation and when do we hire a temp, right? When do you get an intern? And that's still a very strong consideration in today's business world. That not everything needs to be automated. Not everything should be automated or should be very granular in those. Sometimes you do a little bit of peanut butter. And so do think about it. Do consider, your over under licensing approach when it comes to management complexity. That said, the don't purely over license. It's not useful. It's more expensive. Maybe you think, oh, this will force us to adopt and consume. That pure license reasoning, it usually isn't enough, right? You want to be able to adopt and consume what you actually have access to. I'll talk a little bit later about partners helping in that space. But I remember in the early days of Teams, I would talk to customers, and the IT team would be like, well, I turned Teams on, nothing's happening. Well, sure, but you didn't have a rollout plan. You didn't have an education plan. You didn't have lighthouse users that were, sort of, portraying the behavior or being examples of how Teams should be used. And of course, there's no adoption. Licensing's a bit the same way. Just because you turn on E5 or Business Premium doesn't mean everybody's going to magically start using, labels, for example. You're going to have to work to adopt. And so over licensing, for whatever those goals might be, that still lands on the don't list. So do use analytics and reporting to check in on your environment, right? The days of EAs working at Microsoft, every 2.5 years, we'd talk to a customer, they'd sign their EA, and then we'd go away for another 2.5 years. That's not the right cadence for anybody. If you're working with a partner, monthly and quarterly checkups. If you're not working with a partner, or you're doing this work yourselves, monthly or quarterly checkups, right? Ensure that you've got the consumption out there, that you have the adoption of the licensing you are purchasing, right? Make sure that the teams are using or growing their usage of the tools that you make available, and address any concerns or any gaps that you might see. The flip side of that, the don't overanalyze it, though. Hey, Timmy's only used his phone to make an outside call, once last month. Let's pull his phone number, right? I've seen instances where customers are really just on the razor's edge of, taking analytics and rolling it into decision making and things like that. It's like the upfront, under, and over licensing. This is, it can be counterproductive. These should be, quick check-ins with action items, but it shouldn't lead to sort of a death spiral of activity because we have two users who, aren't making enough phone calls, and I'm paying $12 a month for them to be on the calling plan. So that's $24. And in the time I said that sentence, I cost my boss $24, right? So you have to figure out whether, I hate whether the juice is worth the squeeze. For some reason, that really grates on me, but it's appropriate here, right? Figure out whether the reaction based on the scrutiny is really going to be worth it. And so don't overanalyze, don't over scrutinize. Maybe, commit to yourself, thinking about the analytics at a departmental level, at a user persona level versus, why isn't Susie in accounting having more Teams meetings using audio conferencing? Let's pull it, right? That's a little bit too far. That's a little bit of overcorrect into the skid. So do look for redundancy in your licensing. And this sort of opens up the world outside of Microsoft, right? Whether it's Microsoft or whether it's security vendors or whether it's, backup and infrastructure vendors, look for redundancy or over coverage in what you're purchasing. Again, to be honest, a lot of our licensing reviews and a lot of our assessment work ends up with either cost savings, or the funding for the improved license on one side is by retiring the license on the other side, or, hey, if we turn off your DLP product outside of Microsoft because you have Business Premium or you have E5, that'll fund the professional services to get people to really adopt it over the next 2 months. So that redundancy or that over licensing, not just within a particular sort of pillar or silo, but across your entire organization, can oftentimes fund cost savings, can fund partner engagements or IT investment in making the overall environment something much better. This is one of our constantly repeating scenarios where we go into environments, we start out in the Microsoft world, we ask a few questions. Really, you're paying, X dollars to Ring Central when you've got Teams Phone. We just would need to add calling plans and have it be integrated in what you do. So all of a sudden, I've got the cost savings, not just pick on Ring Central, but I've got the cost savings from retiring that Ring Central contract to fund not just the licensing, but an adoption program to make sure everybody's using their Teams phones, right? It's examples like that we have all the time of working with customers, right? It usually ends up, like I said, saving them money, funding the professional services, funding the internal IT to be able to do great things with that money saved. So don't ignore the business's ability to adopt and change. The licensing discussion isn't just an IT discussion. It's a business discussion, right? What are their needs? What is their ability to adopt new solutions or change what they do? How does the licensing map to your business process? Again, we've got great people who can wade into this and really help with this business side conversation too. It can't be IT centric. One of my favorite moments was working with a bank. We were talking about, security, whether EMS or E5 or something like that. And I was in the room with the CIO and the chief compliance officer for the bank. And I said, well, okay, so, what are your rules for, information retention or, data loss prevention, sensitive information types and things like that? And the CIO turned to the compliance officer and said, well, what are they, right? IT shouldn't be, on point for a policy like that. That should be them implementing a policy that comes from a general counsel or a chief compliance officer. And so even outside of the compliance world into just the world of business, your business teams are going to help drive your decisions. So don't ignore them. Be realistic about their ability to adopt and change. Are you ready for going from a Nortel phone on a desk for 500 people to 500 people using Teams phone in a month? Pretty aggressive, right? Make sure that the business's ability and be realistic about it, their ability to adapt and change is super critical. And when it comes to, well, how do you address that? Again, that's where partners come into play. Oftentimes, we've come into customers to help them work with the business, whether it's training and education, whether it's adoption programs, whether it's communications. We can help with that aspect of the project too. You can't just flip on that switch and expect the business to not just buy in, but to go all in on change. So do involve the business in licensing decisions, making sure that it's aligned, get buy-in, ensure that they understand that this is an investment in their ability to do their jobs, to do new things, to add value to the business. So don't lock in or don't make long-term decisions when your organization. It was funny in my notes, I wrote sort of like Jim Cramer saying this, like change, right? You're growing, you're shrinking, you're merging, you're doing all these things. These contracts have terms, right? One of the things, ironically, that we've been asking for and I think is coming to fruition here relatively soon is multi-year CSP contracts. And so while we have that ability, we also still have the ability to go month to month. And it can be useful to optimize for your ability to pivot and change, right? I think we're all familiar at some point in our life, a month-to-month lease is more expensive than year to year. But when you're getting married, when you're looking at buying a house, when there's a kid on the way, oftentimes you're willing to pay that month to month to have the flexibility because things are changing. And so I think the don't here is don't assume, don't lock in when it's not appropriate to. You still have those options to have different buying mechanisms because your organization is just in a unique spot based on change, based on what's going on in the environment, and willing to pay a premium for that. Be willing to pay a premium for that ability to pivot. So a couple final thoughts. The last one, do be open to change. Don't just renew. Don't just do the same thing. Like I said, oftentimes, we will work with customers and there's savings to be had. There's changes to be made. I don't know. I'd have to talk to our CTO. Hopefully he would back me up. I don't know that we've ever done an assessment for a customer and been like, you know what? No changes recommended. I think there's always something that can be improved. And whether it's, licensing type and mix or pricing or term or ancillary products that help you retire other support and licensing contracts, there's always going to be something that we find, or there is always something we find that helps customers. And so be open to that, right? Don't just renew. Even if it's not Apex, if it's somebody else, challenge them. Say, hey, help me make sure I'm doing the right thing. And so that's the don't. That's my final don't, right? Don't go it alone. Whether it's an internal advisory team with sort of different domain expertise, finance, IT, someone from the marketing side, representing the business community in your organization, whether it's a peer group, if you're the CIO in Toledo, Ohio, use your peers, talk about these things, get feedback on their experiences, right? Not not necessarily comparing pricing or things like that. I suppose you could, but more about like hey, how did you approach this? What's the T minus plan? What do you do at 90 days? What do you do at 60 days, at 45, at 30? What are some of the things that you wish you would have done different last time, right? Use your peers for those things. And lastly, and selfishly, use a partner. Apex has been around a long time, doing licensing work for a long time, but also doing the managed services and the professional services that surround it. And so this goes back to our very first do, which is consider value, right? Don't go it alone. Get a team and consider the value holistically, I think is what I'd leave you with. I still have customers where the only thing they want to talk about is price. And I'll do it, right? My team will engage on that. But I'm always challenging my team to work hard to expand that conversation, right? Price is what you pay, value is what you get. So that was my goal today, is just to share some ideas and some stories around, some best practices in this space, some do's and don'ts. Next steps, we'd love to hear from you. We're here to help. We've been around a long time and have done this work for a lot of customers. Like I said, I can't think of a single instance where we've dug in on a new customer, their licensing, their business, their infrastructure, and been like, yeah, we have nothing to say. I think we always are able to add value and help you find things that you can do different or change and make the world, make your world a better place. So lots of expertise in this space. Would love to help you out. But this goes to my last don't, which is just don't go it alone. Find someone internally, externally, peer group to help you when you navigate this course. So contact your account executive. If you're a current customer, if you'd like to do a licensing review, we're here to help. If you're not a customer, if you're just interested in engaging with Apex or the Apex story, reach out to sales or just reach out to me directly, sthompson@apexdigital.com. Our website has lots of great resources around this topic and around all the services we offer out to the market. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for checking in on Fridays with Steve, and we'll see you again next time.